Figuring out how to price your work is one of the most challenging parts of being a freelance videographer, especially when you're just starting out, but really in all parts of the journey. Partly because talking about money is kind of taboo and kind of intimidating, partly because pricing video work isn't static or singular, it's fluid, and generally it's based project to projects, the numbers change, and without references, without the ability to talk to other people in the industry, have candid, honest conversations about what they charge, how they price, it's really hard to get your bearings and understand what your value and what your worth actually is. So in today's video, I want to break down exactly what I charge and how I approach pricing real client work in hopes that it will help you in your journey figure out what you should be charging and how you should be pricing. And if you're farther along in the journey than I am, you can let me know down below what you think about my pricing model. Maybe I'll learn something as well and be able to shift or change or up my rates based on your input, feedback, and experience, which is one of the beautiful things about YouTube. Hopefully honest, candid conversations without any gatekeeping can help us all advance and all grow in our career. A rising tide raises all ships. So let's dive straight in and talk about money. Now, first and foremost, like I said, every project is a little bit different. It's really hard just to give out one singular number and say this is what you should be charging, because probably the most important word is understanding scope. And this is where communicating with clients is a really big deal. Before you ever throw out a quote or begin talking numbers or money, you first have to understand the scope of the project that you're being approached to execute on. What are the deliverables? How is the video going to be used? What is the pre-production and post-production requirements of your time? What kind of gear is necessary? All of these pieces play a factor in how you're going to price work. There's a difference between just showing up as a freelance videographer, where you're bringing a camera, you're pressing record, and you're handing off raw footage, versus being involved in a multi-day shoot where you're involved in post-production and pre-production, and you're running multiple cameras and running a team, right? They're totally different beasts. So having pre-production conversations with your client, understanding the scope of what they're expecting and what the project actually entails, what the deliverables are, is absolutely paramount in pricing your work appropriately. And I've found that most pricing or money stress in client conversations really comes down to an unclear scope. Pricing problems are usually scope problems, and that's the first thing we have to understand. So here are a couple questions I like to ask clients to get a better idea of scope so I can make a more informed quote, right? Those questions are: what is this video for? How are you going to use it for your business or your company? What is the outcome or the call to action that's a part of this? This just helps you understand the value to the client, helps you understand the scope. I'm going to use that word a lot, of the video that you're creating. Where will it live? Is it a website video? Is it a social media piece? Are they going to be running paid ads against it? Is it just internal? How many deliverables are expected? Are you just shooting one talking head interview? Do you need to deliver cut downs? Do you need to deliver multiple videos, multiple interviews? Is there a brand story piece, a mini doc piece? Is there a campaign in here, right? These are all questions that help you understand. What's the timeline? Is there a hard deadline, or is there flexibility? How involved do I need to be in the project? Am I just showing up and shooting? Am I directing, producing? Am I editing and coloring? And right, that's a really important question. How involved do I need to be in the process? And then of course, it's important to ask your client, what is the budget that you have set aside for this project? Now, I know in my experience when I was first starting out, I hated asking that question. It made me really uncomfortable to ask clients about budget. I don't know what that was exactly. There was just something in me that had a little bit of fear about asking clients about budget, but it is so important to set the stage early in the conversation, to understand how the client is approaching this project, what budget they have in mind, just to make sure you're even on the same page and in the same ballpark. Clear scope equals clear pricing, understanding your value and charging accordingly. So with all that out of the way, now let's talk some hard numbers. There are sort of two hard numbers that I use, and that's my day rate and my half day rate. Now, like I said, sometimes this applies, sometimes it doesn't. But in full transparency, my day rate, which is 8 hours of shooting for me, I'll bring 2 cameras, I'll bring 2 lights, just a little 3-point lighting setup with no pre-production and really no post-production. I'm showing up, I'm filming, I'm handing you the raw files. For me, that's $1,200. That's my current day rate. That's what I'm charging. And so far that has felt good to me, and clients have been willing to pay that. So I know there are people who charge more. I know there are people who charge a little bit less. That's sort of been the sweet spot. The half day rate for me is $700, which is just a little bit more than the full day, half of the full day rate, just because there is work on and packing and loading and prepping gear that I want to charge for, right? 4 hours, 8 hours. It's not just half the amount of time because of the prep work. So $700, $1,200, those are my baseline half day and day rate fees. I've found for me, if I'm going to be away from my family for 8 hours, if I'm going to have to take a day off from my 9 to 5 job, put in for PTO, $1,200 is the number where that makes sense. When the number starts to get too much less than that, the work doesn't become as worth it for me. So that's part of figuring out your day rate, is just figuring out how much money you're actually willing to do the work for. Industry standard aside, what is worth it to you? Now you want to be careful that you don't go too low when you're just starting out, kind of shoot yourself in the foot, because you can set a bad precedent, and you can kind of dig yourself in a little bit of a hole where you're all of a sudden doing a lot of money, or you're all of a sudden doing a lot of work for not a lot of money, and you do want to avoid that so that you have room and opportunity to grow as a professional moving forward. But having a starting point is really important. But like I said, that's not the final quote. That's just where I start. Now, occasionally I am hired just as a videographer to show up with my cameras and my couple lights, shoot a couple interviews, hand off raw footage, but I found a lot of my projects are more involved than that. But having that day rate number is still a helpful starting point as I begin to piece together a larger quote. So when do I begin to expand off that day rate? Well, like I said, it's when the scope begins to shift away from just that basic package, and you learn this really early on in the conversation. So one of the things I like to do when I'm talking to clients is help them understand there's sort of this like golden triangle of pricing. Didn't come up with this. You've heard this probably other places, but you can either have something done fast, done well, or done cheap. Generally speaking, you can't have all three, right? So if you want it fast and good, it's gonna be expensive. If you want it fast and cheap, it's probably not gonna be that high quality. So you can kind of use that to help your client understand how they wanna invest their money for the final outcome that they're gonna get. So depending on the time that they need to shoot the project, the complexity of the project, the amount of gear needed, how involved I need to be, like I said, in editing the project or in the pre-production, am I hiring and bringing on crew? What is the urgency or the rush on the project? What is my role other than just the shoot, right? All of these things are scope conversations that increase my price above that $1,200 day rate. And this is the piece that's a little less defined for me. This is where I still kind of have to figure out some things project to project. I don't have a set template where I just say, if there's this many extra hours of shooting, I charge this much more. If I'm editing, this is how much I charge. And I do need to get a little bit better about that probably. Generally speaking, for editing jobs, I tend to float in the $90 to $100 an hour. For extra hours on work, $100 an hour, somewhere in that range. But overall, this pricing triangle helps me have conversations with my clients about about the quote, and helps me approach those conversations with a level of confidence. It allows me to frame pricing as a problem-solving exercise and opportunity, right? We can tie monetary value to specific outcomes aligned with their priorities for their specific project. So I can say things like, hey, if we want to keep the quality really high and still deliver on the timetable that you need, we're going to have to increase our budget a little bit in these areas. And it's really helpful to be able to ground that conversation in tangible outcomes such as quality and time. So of course, these are all soft rules, and there are of course cases where I break these rules. Like I broke down in a video a couple videos ago about this podcast that I'm editing, right? I'm breaking some of my own rules because that is a client that I have a previous relationship with. It's work I was excited about. And these are some reasons why you might charge a little less than you would otherwise, right? Long-term clients, editing only projects, flexible timelines, slower seasons, ministry or church work for me is a big deal where I like to give a little bit of a discount, relationship building opportunities. These are all maybe different scenarios where you'll take a little bit of a pay cut because you really want the work, you're invested in the work, you care deeply about the relationship, and that is totally fine. There are no hard, fast rules when it comes to video work, and you can absolutely charge what you want for a project. Really, what matters at the end of the day is that the money is worth it to you, not what anybody on YouTube or any other platform says that you should be charging. So take this all with a huge grain of salt. Like I said, I'm still fairly new in my career. I'm just putting this out there as a helpful resource for you, not trying to say this is how you need to do it, but I know I would have found a video like this helpful when I was sort of just beginning and figuring out my pricing structure and strategy. And I hope if you disagree or if you have a different structure or strategy that you'll let me know so that I can learn from you as well. So just a couple closing thoughts, right? Pricing will never feel perfect. It's always gonna be a little bit of a challenging conversation where you're having to adapt client to client, and that is okay. I think flexible pricing is really important because projects are flexible, right? So generally speaking, clarity is important. Clarity equals confidence. Clarity on scope, clarity on pricing, clarity in communication, that will help the relationship so much. So I know it's challenging, but I've found the more just direct and upfront I can be in having conversations around finances, the better the relationship is, the better the project goes, the more smoother things run for everybody. Actually being afraid to talk about budget, talk about money has sort of hurt me in the past with clients, and it just creates a weird vibe. So just be honest, be upfront. This is a business transaction, and that is an okay thing. So there you go. That's how I approach pricing my video work. I hope that was helpful for you. I'd love to hear down below if you think there's ways in which I could improve, or what you're doing, how you're approaching charging and pricing your video work. Catch you in the next one. Peace.